because I'm not that old. I really don't wear reading glasses, but no. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm going to try to go
closer to the microphone.
Yeah.
Closer to the microphone.
There you go. Good job.
There we go. Thank you guys so much for being here. I hope you all had a great time out there. It's a little windy, but I really appreciate you being here because you all played with a purpose tonight or today. You really helped raise awareness and funds to help find a cure for ALS, and that's awesome. And thank you to Mike and Brandon Crawford and the whole Crawford family for dedicating this tournament to the cause of ALS. They could pick any charity they want, and they have chosen ALS, and for that we are very grateful. And to Mike Biscotti as well for his tenacity, and someday we will celebrate together a cure for ALS. So, my name is Lesley Heller, and I'm part of the Give 'em Heller team. My husband Kevin was diagnosed with ALS in July of 2019. At the last Crawford Charity Golf event for ALS, Kevin spoke, and that was 17 months ago in Scottsdale, and some of you might have been there, but think about how much has changed in 17 months. That was pre-pandemic. It was a month before the pandemic started, and so I know you all can think about how your lives have changed, and our lives, the Hellers' lives have changed so much in that time. It's really hard to imagine that Kevin played 18 holes of golf that day, just 17 months ago, and he had already lost the ability to speak, but that night he delivered a really amazing message that was very inspirational using some really cool technology that was created by Google. It was a AI technology that used his own voice, but it was created by Google technology. In January 5th, he passed away after an 18-month battle with ALS, and it was quite a journey. We're heartbroken over this. And for those of you that were lucky enough to know Kevin, you know that he had a huge personality and a gigantic spirit that would fill this whole space. And because of that, I believe that we still feel his presence in everything we do. He's with me all the time. And I'm joined today by our daughter, Lauren, who was Kevin's angel. He nicknamed her Angel as a baby, and she really lived it out because she took care of him. We had some caregivers, but she was the favorite. And so she was the angel child. Our son Michael couldn't be here today. He actually just tried to FaceTime me, and I said, I'm about to speak, so I can't be on the phone. As soon as he graduated from high school in May, he left for the Naval Academy in Annapolis, and he just finished plebe summer.
That's awesome.
He made it with another one of his little friends here. And if you all, I don't know if you know that my husband Kevin went to West Point and was a huge Army fan, and so everything Navy was really not a good word in our house. And so the only way that Michael got a pass to go to the Naval Academy is that Army doesn't have water polo, and he was a water polo player, and so there was no chance of him going to Army, so he got the okay. And I have to say one of Kevin's most proud dad moments was when Michael got the appointment to attend the Naval Academy. So
Awesome. Yeah.
we're really excited that he's about to start his career at the Naval Academy. So, in thinking what I wanted to talk about tonight, I told Mike initially, I said I want to keep my message to a really high level. I want to teach about ALS because I thought that if I really shared my heart that I would get too emotional and not be able to finish this speech. So I'm sorry I'm having to read a lot of this because I'm trying to keep myself together. But I thought that was really silly and very superficial. Anyone can go home and Google about ALS if you want to, if you really want to learn about it. So instead, I'm going to actually share my heart and our story and tell you about ALS through the eyes of someone who lived it every day. And I hope you will have 3 takeaways from my message, and that is, what is ALS? How do you get diagnosed from ALS? And what can you guys do to help? So first of all, what is ALS? Again, you guys have heard a little bit about ALS, but I won't go into the science about it, but it's a rare neurological disease. But that for some reason, the brain stops communicating with the muscles. And in my husband's case, it happened really quickly. About 75% of cases, the symptoms begin in the limbs, hands and feet. Only about 25% of cases, symptoms start in the bulbar region, which is in your face, in your breathing, speech, and swallowing. And unfortunately, that's what Kevin had, and we knew it early on. Bulbar cases usually progress a lot more rapidly, and the life expectancy is shorter, less than the 2 to 5 year average life expectancy of someone with ALS. Sometimes ALS is slow progressing. That's what we had really hoped for. We hoped, he had really great lung capacity. He was a competitive swimmer, and the doctors told us at the beginning, yes, he's got great lungs. But in the end, he had trouble with swallowing. So first, Kevin lost his speech, like in only 6 months' time from the first day that we noticed his speech. It only took 6 months to lose his speech. He went from a slight slur to no speech at all. And in 7 months after he was diagnosed, he could no longer eat. At last year's golf tournament, he could no longer talk or eat, but he still played 18 holes of golf, like I said. It's crazy how fast his body was falling apart. ALS is a progressive disease, and unlike cancer, which can be removed or go into remission, there's no help with ALS. No one ever gets better from ALS. Currently, there's no cure and no effective treatment at all to reverse the progression of this disease. And by this time last year, just 1 year from diagnosis, Kevin had completely lost the use of his arms and legs. He had been an avid cyclist, and suddenly he was no longer able to ride his bike, and he was completely devastated by that. A good friend of his found a tandem recumbent bike to try to keep him on the bike, but after about a month, last summer, I'll never forget the day, his core, we strapped him into the bike, and he just couldn't hold himself on the bike any longer. And I tell you, he was the most positive guy and always looked at everything in the most positive way, but when he lost that ability to ride his bike, that was probably the lowest point in the journey, because we just realized that the disease was going to rob him of everything that he loved. His only form of communication was using a Bluetooth head mouse to type, since he was no longer able to use his fingers at all. This head mouse, though, he would send long texts to friends, and I couldn't talk to him. Or he couldn't talk to me, I should say. I would read his text with him at night as a way for us to communicate, because when you have, all I would do is talk to him and he couldn't talk back, so I would read his text, and that's how we would have conversation. And I was always amazed what he would say to his friends in text. He sounded like a normal human, because his brain was 100% fine. Only a very small amount of people with ALS have any cognitive issues at all, and he didn't. And so it was just so hard for me to see that, he'd be like, "Hi, buddy, how are you doing?" And I'd be like, "You're laying there, not able to move your body." And so it was really hard to see that he was normal. He just couldn't move his body at all. His ability to swallow and his cough reflex were completely gone by last fall, and he required a lot of help from machines to clear his airway. That was his biggest problem. And after a few months, last winter, the machines just couldn't help anymore, and he would just say, he would text all these different ways. He was an engineer, so he was like, "Try this, try that, try this," and nothing would work. And I'd be like, "I'm so sorry, honey, we've tried everything with these machines." And he'd be like, "The machine's not working." I'm like, "No, the machines were assisting him and they weren't helping him enough anymore." So what is ALS? It is an awful, probably the most awful disease, and it's a disease with no effective treatments and no cure. So that's what it is. How is ALS diagnosed? So not only is there no cure for ALS, there's no test to diagnose ALS, kind of what Mike Piscotti was saying. It is a disease that's diagnosed with something that's called a differential diagnosis, where doctors rule out other diseases to determine that you have ALS. And when it's ruled out, that's what you get. And most experience, like I said, weakness in their hands and feet first. But because of him, Kevin lost his speech first. His speech issue was noticeable in one instant. It wasn't a gradual thing where some people that lose feelings in their hands notice it over time. It was a very one instant issue. It was May of 2019. We traveled to Portugal for Kevin's company club trip. He had been the top sales exec of the year, so we were looking forward to celebrating. The first night was a company reception. And while Lauren and I were in the hotel getting ready, Kevin went to the reception to have a drink with some of his colleagues. He came back about an hour later to get us, and when he started speaking, I immediately noticed that his speech was slurred. I thought maybe he had gone and guzzled some drinks or had some shots with some of these young software guys that he worked with, and he had not, and he knows the problem as well. And we were very concerned. I thought maybe he'd had a stroke or something, but he was feeling fine. So we kind of just brushed it off as it was a long trip, and maybe it was not a big deal. But he was so afraid to be around his colleagues that somebody would notice that we pretty much for that whole vacation stayed to ourselves. And it was so uncharacteristic of Kevin, because he was, people that know him, did Kevin talk? He was the biggest talker in the world. And suddenly the guy couldn't talk, and so it was awful. So while considering the speech problem, I asked him if anything else had been bothering him. He then confessed that he was having some difficulty in swimming. And he was an elite swimmer. He had been a recruited swimmer for Army. And so it was very odd that suddenly he was having a hard time keeping the water out of his nose while he was swimming laps. But he brushed it off as something that was no big deal. And but now, with those two things, we started putting it together and knew that something was seriously wrong. And whatever this was, it was striking in Kevin's two most cherished things, swimming and talking. And it's just like this, it's a devil of a disease. So during this time, though, Kevin, this is back in the summer of 2019, he was very preoccupied with his work. His company was on the verge of getting acquired by Google, and he was very caught up in the buzz. Meanwhile, I was with the computer. I was obsessed with trying to find out what was wrong with my husband. I began to pray, why, God, why are you doing this to us? Why now? We started seeing several specialists trying to determine the cause of these problems. The number of diseases and conditions that cause slurred speech are really very few. It's a short list. And the one that kept popping up was ALS. And it was like a bad dream, because I had already experienced ALS. My stepfather had died of ALS in 2014. And so I just was like, I can't believe that this is still on the list. I was starting to pray that it was a tumor, that we could take it out and he'd have a chance at living. I was like, maybe we got a shot, because I knew that ALS was a death sentence. And I was really hoping that it wouldn't have been ALS. 6 weeks after we noticed the slurred speech, two things happened. First, Kevin's company was acquired by Google, and this should have been one of the happiest days of our lives. Yet on the exact same day, we were told by our neurologist that we were being referred to San Francisco to an ALS clinic. They had ruled out all the other diseases. It was ALS. And it quickly became what should have been one of the happiest days was the worst day of our lives. And I knew that in an instant our lives were changed forever. So what is ALS? It's an awful disease. And how is it diagnosed? It's diagnosed through a differential diagnosis. When they rule out all the other diseases, you're left with ALS, and it's the worst thing. So what can you guys do to help? First of all, you're here tonight, so thank you so much for being here to support. But embrace ALS, and opposed to being afraid of the disease, be inspired by those around you that have ALS. And I say, let's look to the 2021 Giants, because they're having an amazing season. And we say these things. We say never give up, and the Giants never give up. I was watching a game. I think it was August 5th, I wrote down, but I was watching that game. The Giants were down 4-0 in the 9th inning. And I would have gone home. I would have been like, bye-bye. And they came back and won that game. The best comeback they've had in 30 years. I had to look that stat up, but that's pretty impressive. And so, you know, in the ALS community, we say never give up, and these Giants are never giving up. So
Good job.
yeah, we're
Way to go.
excited about that.
Good job.
So never give up. And the other thing to do is to be like Kevin Heller, because we had two choices when he was diagnosed, and we talked about it a lot. We debated what to do when he was diagnosed. A, crawl under a rock, be pissed off, be angry, and just live the rest of our lives at home. We thought about that a lot. And B, live every day to the fullest and get involved and help make a difference in the battle against ALS. We're a family of very strong Christian faith, and we just knew that we wanted to turn to God, and there was a reason that God is sovereign, and there was a reason that God wanted to take Kevin early. And I said, don't know why. But we chose to live that way. We wanted to leave a legacy for our kids, that all of us go through bad times in life, and let's show each other that through the tough times, you know, we got to keep living and do what we can. And so that's what we chose to do. We chose option B, and we started Team Give 'em Heller. That was our team motto, just weeks after Kevin was diagnosed. In fact, it was just a few weeks that we attended the Giants' first, the ALS Day, just less than a month after Kevin's diagnosis, and that's where we met. Crawford's and Piscotty's. We sat there in the Robbie Dean's seats and came up with a plan of how we were going to get involved. And we raised a lot of money and awareness through ice bucket challenges that we held. Kevin's a big cyclist, and we did the Napa Ride for the Cure. I think he raised records amounts of money for that. And then, as you all heard, we were part of the Lou Gehrig Day Committee, which is now going to be an annual event. So it's part of Kevin's legacy. And he knew, he didn't get to attend the first game since he died in January, but he knew that it was going to happen. And from his hospital bed in our dining room, I can't tell you guys how thrilled he was that he was going to be part of that. And he knew how much baseball has always been a big part of my life, not as much his, but he was so happy to leave me with something that I could always be part of. So he was giving even to the very end. So what specifically can you guys do? You can help in 3 ways. 1, support ALS fundraisers, like the one I just mentioned, because ALS is not uncurable. It's an underfunded disease. So we need more funds. Raise awareness by talking openly about this disease, educating people, motivating them to get involved in some kind of capacity. And the next and last thing is, if you see ever anybody with ALS that's in one of those really big, ugly wheelchairs, don't be afraid. You know, Kevin was this big, strapping, macho guy that in 18 months became a shell of a human in one of those wheelchairs, and yet he was still the same man. So don't be afraid. Embrace people that have the disease, because it's you'll learn a lot. They're incredible people, like we said, and you'll learn a lot about them. So thank you for letting me share my story. I appreciate it.